Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Ilya Kovalchuk is back. Yes, he is. He's on a 123-point pace right now. And he's one of the most added players on Yahoo, of course. I mean, you had to have seen that coming after his ridiculous performances recently. He had an assist, and then he got 2 assists in the game after that. And his minutes are actually pretty insanely high. He played 19 minutes and then 21 minutes the last game. So we don't have a lot of stats to look at. There's not a lot of numbers you can point to with Ilya Kovalchuk because we only have 2 games. So there's not a lot to take a look at, but there are some indicators and there are some things that I can point out to you to say you should probably be careful. And of course, there is advice on how deep you should be picking them up, that sort of thing. Now, what I will say is that Roto World said in their little player card part next to the Yahoo, whatever it is, wherever Roto World puts their stuff on the Yahoo player card, they had said that only deeper leagues for Kovalchuk. And I will say immediately that I disagree with that. I think Kovalchuk has more value than just a deep league setting. I think he can have value in even a shallower league at the moment, depending on who you're streaming and what your situation is. But first, as always, of course, let's take a look at deployment and where they have Ilya Kovalchuk playing on the Montreal Canadiens. So right now, he is slated, according to Daily Faceoff, on the top line with Tatar and Philip Deneau, and that's where they have him on. But that's not exactly what happened in the last game. If you take a look at the last game, Ilya Kovalchuk actually played most of his time with Max Domi and Nick Suzuki, which is technically the second line. They have Arturi Lehkonen. So Daily Faceoff has Arturi Lehkonen, Max Domi, and Nick Suzuki on that second line. But in the last game, they switched that, and it was Kovalchuk swapping with Arturi Lehkonen. So Lehkonen went up to the top line with Deneau and Tatar, and Kovalchuk came down with Suzuki and Domi. Although, honestly, they're kind of a 1A, 1B situation with that line. Neither one is really top line. They're both kind of equal. And you can kind of see that by deployment, right? And part of that also happens that Ilya Kovalchuk got some time with Deneau and Tatar, and at some point they switched that. But it didn't really work for Kovalchuk. I'm actually surprised to an extent that he got so much time, because from a Corsi 4 percentage standpoint, that line of Kovalchuk, Domi, and Suzuki was the worst line last night by a wide margin. The Deneau, Arturi Lehkonen, and Tomas Tatar line had a 75% Corsi 4 percentage. Dale Weiss, Nate Thompson, and wow, that is a name I don't know how to pronounce. Lucas, I'm gonna assume that the J is silent. I'm gonna call him Vedimo. I doubt that's right. I've never heard of that player in my life. Maybe a Habs fan can tell me in the comments who he is. I'm going to go look him up after this too. Seriously, never heard of that player in my life. Anyways, that line had 71.4% Corsi 4 as well. So the line of Domi, Kovalchuk, and Suzuki was the worst. They had 41.7% Corsi 4 percentage. That's awful. That's not very good. Granted, there weren't that many Corsi 4 opportunities in general, but when they were on the ice, they didn't control the Corsi 4 percentage. So that's a little worrying, because if that's the case, and that happens to just be a Kovalchuk effect, which I don't necessarily think it is, we don't expect him to keep this deployment. We won't expect him to stay on this top line, right? You would expect Gallagher to come right back in, and you're going to see probably Arturi Lehkonen be on one of those lines. You're going to see Gallagher be on one of those lines, and then you're going to see Kovalchuk go down to one of the third lines, most likely. But I'm not necessarily sure that's the case. He might be able to keep one of those top 2 spots, but I'm not sure, because if we look at Daily Faceoff, right, there's only 2 slots open. Really, unless you decide to move Nick Suzuki away. If you move Nick Suzuki, say, to the third line, then okay, there's a spot on the second line for Kovalchuk, because the big question here is what happens when Gallagher comes back. That's the big mover for Kovalchuk, is what happens when he comes back. Right now, he's getting good deployment because Gallagher is injured. It is not because, oh my God, we got Kovalchuk and we want to play him a lot of minutes. No, it's mostly because Gallagher is out. And quite frankly, he's been playing well, so why not give him minutes, right? So when Gallagher comes back, he's going to slot in probably right back to where he was with Tatar and Deneau, right up there to that top line. Or he'll play with Domi. The big question mark, I think, is what happens around Domi, is my opinion. I think that's where it's going to get interesting, is you could put Kovalchuk for Suzuki. You could put Kovalchuk for Lehkonen. There's a lot of moving parts there. I think most likely what happens is Kovalchuk goes down to the third line, pushes Nick Cousins down, and pushes Dale Weiss out of the lineup. That's what makes the most sense to me. And at that point, he probably becomes less valuable. Now, if we look at the power play, Kovalchuk is technically on the first power play, but really they have kind of a 1A, 1B power play. He's currently on the one with Domi, Kotkaniemi, Cousins, and Shea Weber. That's technically the first unit. But the second unit is not any slouch, and they kind of play a 50-50 power play. And the second power play, again, is Tatar, Danault, Pauling, Suzuki, and Jeff Petrie. That's the second unit. And if we look at the last game, Kovalchuk kind of spent time on both. He played on that top one with Domi, Kotkaniemi, and Lehkonen, and he also played with Domi, Suzuki, and Tatar. So they were kind of trying things out. And a second one was 13%. The first one was 39.1%. So he's getting quite a bit of time on the power play. But again, that power play is mostly split up, for the most part, 50-50 throughout any given game. And so he's getting good looks on the power play too. But again, the question mark comes up of what happens when Gallagher comes back. Does Kovalchuk go down to the Petrie power play, or does he stay on the Weber power play? So right now there's a lot of question marks about deployment. And that's the big thing with Kovalchuk right now, is that you can't take anything at face value from a deployment standpoint. From a deployment standpoint, you can't look at this and say, this is who he's going to be. This is who he is. We just don't know because of that Gallagher injury. And right now, Gallagher, again, has a concussion. He's on injured reserve. And so who knows when he's going to come back right now? Could be soon. Could be in a few weeks. Concussions are hard to nail down. But for now, Kovalchuk has fantastic deployment. I will take a 21-minute guy any day. So I'll explain in a little bit who I'd kind of take him over. So there's a few stats to look at really quick. So for Kovalchuk here, let's hide some of these other players so that we can just focus on Kovalchuk here. So Kovalchuk right now is getting 20 minutes of average time on ice on the Montreal Canadiens. And we're just going to look at the last 7 days here because he only has 2 games played, right? Under Montreal. So that's all we're going to look at here. And under the Los Angeles Kings, just as a reminder here, he was getting 16 minutes of average time on ice. And so this increase to 20 is huge for him, especially if he can keep it. And last night, of course, he got 21 minutes. His shot pace has gone up a little bit, so he's been shooting more on the Montreal Canadiens. But again, that makes sense because he's getting more net time on ice. Because he's getting so much more time on ice, he has more opportunities to shoot. That's pretty much all it is. He still has not scored a goal with the Montreal Canadiens, although he has shot 5 times, but that's fine. His shooting percentage on the season is 7.5 on the Los Angeles Kings. Last season, it was 11.35%. So I wouldn't be that shocked right now. I wouldn't be shocked by no goals. He's been playing well. What's really concerning is on-ice shooting percentage. His IPP is totally fine at 75%. It is high, but he was at 71% last season. He was at 92% on the Kings, which is kind of insane. That's definitely not sustainable. But 75% on the Montreal Canadiens feels good. It's the on-ice shooting percentage at 17% that is just way too high. You are not going to see that continue. And that's the big lever here as well, is that when that comes down, you're going to get less points. But at the end of the day, you know what? If you were to get, let's say, one assist, right? A game, fine. You're still point per game. I don't think he's a point per game player if he gets this deployment. I think he could be like a 70-point player if he were to keep this deployment, which, again, I don't think he's going to. That's the big thing. But let's say he does keep this deployment for the next few weeks, right? That's kind of the question. He's getting good offensive zone starts as well, 75% offensive zone starts. He's actually hitting more. But let's say that Ilya Kovalchuk can actually keep this deployment. What if for the next few weeks, let's say, Gallagher takes a while to come back? What happens then? Well, in that case, I really like Kovalchuk. I really like him while Gallagher is out. I'm actually going to try to add him for Bertuzzi in one of my Cats leagues. That's if they count shots, blocks, and hits. I'm going to try to pick him up there. I'm going to try to get him in my positions league because he's left wing, right wing as well. I'm going to try to get him in my keeper league. Maybe swap in for Howla. That's the kind of move that I'd like to make. I think that if Kovalchuk can keep this deployment, he has a pretty high ceiling because Montreal is a pretty good team. He's getting really good minutes. We know he's a good player. If he can keep, while he's on this top line, top power play, I like it a lot. And I would make the swap for guys like Bertuzzi. I would make the swap for guys like Howla. Just guys who you kind of know what their ceiling is, right? You know what they're going to get. You know what they've been producing at for the season. And then now comes in this guy who has way better deployment than any of those others and has a much higher ceiling. And so that's where I'd take Kovalchuk. But I would not have a long leash. And of course, as with almost any streamer, I would pay very close attention to what their deployment is. to what they're doing. When you look at Kovalchuk, you got to pay attention not just to daily faceoff, because that's not necessarily, like we just saw, right? That's wrong. Daily faceoff is already wrong, and in-game they changed that last time. And that line that they tried actually was not very good from a statistical perspective. Of course, they scored points, but from a statistical perspective, they weren't very good and did not control play. And so that's what you got to pay attention to, is pay attention more to Frozen Pool, see where they're playing Kovalchuk. But for now, I like him a lot as a streamer, and I would absolutely make the grab. He's one of the most added players, not surprised, and I don't blame people for grabbing him right now. And I don't agree entirely that he's only worth it in the deepest of leagues. I think that even in a 12-person Cats League, he is worth it, because you're probably rostering guys like maybe Josh Morrissey, maybe Tyler Bertuzzi. Would I take Kovalchuk over those guys? Yeah, I probably would. Although if, you had Morrissey, I'd probably take Vatanen or Ronek over him, but they might be owned. So Kovalchuk is worth the gamble, in my opinion. And at the end of the day, if he doesn't perform later, you can always drop him and pick up someone else. So there you go. That is the Kovalchuk take. He is back, and kind of back with a vengeance right now. Thanks for watching this episode of the Fantasy Hockey Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. We put out videos all the time, and we just want to help you win. Speaking of videos, you might want to check out these cool ones right over here.